Imagine stepping outside into a frozen wasteland and finding a wolf the size of a small bear, collapsed across your firewood, covered in ice, completely motionless. You're certain he's dead, until you see his chest rise, just once. Barely. I'm Oliver, and what I'm about to share with you is one of the most incredible stories of trust and loyalty between human and wild animal you'll ever hear. Real quick, hit subscribe and comment what city you're watching from. Now let's dive into this. Elena Cross was 32 years old when she decided civilization had nothing left to offer her. After losing her fiancé in a car accident 3 years prior, she'd sold everything, packed her grief into a hiking backpack, and moved to a remote cabin in central Alaska, 70 miles from the nearest town. Out here, the silence was so profound it had weight. The kind of quiet where you could hear your own heartbeat, where loneliness wasn't something you felt. It was something you wore like a second skin. She'd been alone for 9 months when the blizzard hit. February in Alaska doesn't mess around. This particular storm had been raging for 5 straight days, turning her world into a snow globe someone wouldn't stop shaking. Elena had been trapped inside, rationing supplies, reading the same books for the 3rd time, talking to herself, just to remember what her voice sounded like. When the wind finally died on the 6th morning, the silence that replaced it was almost violent. She needed firewood desperately. The temperature inside the cabin had dropped to 48 degrees, and her breath was visible even near the dying embers of her fireplace. She bundled up in layers, grabbed her axe, and stepped outside into a landscape so white and pristine it hurt to look at. The sun was just cresting the mountains, turning the snow into a field of diamonds. That's when she saw him. Sprawled across her neatly stacked firewood like some mythical creature that had fallen from the sky was a wolf. Not just any wolf, a massive black wolf, easily 130 pounds, with fur so dark it looked like a tear in the white fabric of the world. Ice crystals clung to his coat and he wasn't moving, not even a little. Elena stopped dead, her breath catching in her throat. Wolves rarely came this close to human dwellings. They were too smart, too cautious. This one must have been running from something or chasing something and collapsed here in his final moments. She could see drag marks in the snow leading from the tree line, like he'd pulled himself those last dozen yards on nothing but will before his body finally gave out. She stood there for a long moment, just staring, feeling an unexpected kinship with this dying predator. She understood what it meant to keep moving when everything inside you wanted to stop. She should have left him there. That's what you're supposed to do. Nature takes care of its own. But something made her walk closer, boots crunching in the fresh snow, until she was standing right next to him. Up close, she could see the scars. Old wounds crisscrossing his muzzle, his shoulders, the map of a violent life etched into his body. He was old, she realized, gray creeping into the black fur around his face. This wasn't a young wolf caught in a bad storm. This was an old warrior who probably should have died winters ago but was too stubborn to quit. Elena knelt down, reaching out hesitantly, and that's when she saw it. His ribcage, moving, just barely. The shallowest breath, so faint she almost missed it. And then his eye, the one not buried in snow, cracked open. Just a sliver. Yellow as sulfur, not focusing on anything, just open, still alive, still fighting. Her heart started hammering. Every rational part of her brain screamed to back away, to go inside, to let nature finish this. Wolves weren't pets. They were apex predators with jaws that could crush bone and instincts that said humans were dangerous. But Elena looked at that barely breathing wolf, at the way he'd dragged himself here to die, and she thought about all the times over the past 3 years she'd felt exactly the same way, dragging herself through days that felt impossible, looking for anywhere that felt like rest. She made a decision that was either incredibly compassionate or incredibly stupid. Probably both. She went back inside, grabbed a tarp, and returned. The wolf hadn't moved, hadn't closed his eye, just kept breathing those shallow, desperate breaths. Elena spread the tarp next to him and then, hands shaking, she began the process of rolling his massive body onto it. He was dead weight, over 100 pounds of frozen muscle and fur, and it took her 15 minutes of grunting effort to get him positioned. He didn't resist, didn't even seem aware of what was happening. She dragged him across the snow, through her door, and into her cabin. Her arms screamed with the effort. By the time she got him positioned near the fireplace, not too close to overheat him but close enough to help, she was drenched in sweat despite the cold. She threw 2 more logs on the fire and just stood there, breathing hard, staring at the enormous predator now occupying her living room floor, and thought, "What have I just done?" The wolf lay completely still. His black fur was matted with ice and what looked like old blood. She could see his ribs too clearly under his coat, malnourished, exhausted, probably sick or injured in ways she couldn't see. Elena grabbed every blanket she owned and piled them around him, creating a nest of warmth. Then she sat down in her rocking chair, placed her loaded rifle across her lap with the safety on, and waited. If this wolf woke up and decided she was a threat, she had maybe 3 seconds to react, if that. Hours crawled by. The fire crackled and popped. Outside, the wind started picking up again, that low moan that meant the storm's second act was beginning. Elena watched the wolf breathe. Slowly, the ice in his fur began to melt, creating puddles on her floor. His breathing deepened, became more regular, and at some point she realized she was talking to him. Nothing profound, just narrating her actions. Adding more wood now. Storm's coming back. You picked a hell of a time to almost die. Her voice sounded strange after days of silence, almost foreign. Night fell. Elena heated up a can of soup, ate without tasting it, eyes never leaving the wolf. He still hadn't moved beyond breathing. She started to wonder if maybe she'd just given him a warmer place to die, which was something, she supposed. Better than freezing alone on a woodpile. But then, around midnight, she saw his ear flick. Just once, testing the air. And then his eye, the yellow one, opened fully and looked directly at her. Every muscle in Elena's body locked up. Her hand moved instinctively toward the rifle. This was the moment. This was where he either accepted her presence or decided she needed to be eliminated. His eye was unlike anything she'd ever seen. Not animal, not human. Something in between, ancient and knowing and utterly wild. They stared at each other across the firelight, woman and wolf, predator and predator, because humans were predators too, just ones who'd forgotten how to hunt. The wolf didn't growl, didn't bare his teeth, just looked at her with that impossible yellow eye, and she could see him thinking, processing. Where am I? How did I get here? Is this human dangerous? Can I move? Should I run? 1,000 calculations happening behind that gaze. And then, slowly, his head lowered back to the blankets. Not unconscious, just choosing not to fight. Choosing, impossibly, to trust. Just a little. Just enough. Elena let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, we're good." She didn't move her hand from the rifle, but she didn't pick it up either. The storm hit full force that night, the kind that made the cabin shake on its foundation, that made you wonder if the roof would hold, or if you'd wake up buried under 3 feet of snow and timber. The wolf slept. Elena dozed in her chair, jerking awake every time he shifted or made a sound. When gray morning light finally filtered through the windows, he was still there, still breathing, and when she stood up to make coffee, his head tracked her movement. Alert, wary, but not aggressive. Day 1 of their strange cohabitation began. Elena made breakfast, canned beans and stale crackers, and the wolf watched every move she made. She talked to him, her voice filling the silence she'd lived in for months.
Roommates for a while.
Storm's still going strong.
You don't snore.
Looks like we're roommates for a while. Hope you don't snore. His ear twitched, like he was listening. Mid-morning she watched him try to stand. He got his front legs under him, trembling with effort, and collapsed. Tried again. Collapsed. He was hurt, she realized. Not just exposure and exhaustion. Something deeper. Maybe internal injuries, maybe just age catching up all at once. Elena did something that was either brave or insane. She heated up some water, let it cool to lukewarm, and carried a bowl over to him. She set it down just out of his reach and backed away quickly. The wolf looked at the water, looked at her, and then, inch by painful inch, he dragged himself forward and drank. Lapped at it desperately like he hadn't had water in days. When the bowl was empty, he looked at her again, and she could have sworn she saw gratitude in that yellow gaze. By day 2, they'd fallen into a rhythm. Elena would set food near him, jerky and pieces of dried salmon she'd smoked last fall, along with fresh water. He ate. Not much, but enough. He was getting stronger. She could see it. He could sit up now, could turn his head without obvious pain. And he watched her constantly, studying her, like he was trying to figure out what kind of human she was. The kind who shot wolves from helicopters? Or the kind who apparently dragged them inside like a complete lunatic? She found herself talking more. About her fiancé, David. About the accident.
Every time I close my eyes, I see it again.
About how she'd come here to escape the pitying looks and the well-meaning friends who didn't understand that some grief doesn't have an expiration date. The wolf listened, or seemed to. His yellow eyes never left her face, and for the first time in 3 years, Elena cried. Really cried. Not the silent tears she'd shed into her pillow, but actual shoulder-shaking sobs that felt like they'd tear her apart. And the wolf just sat there, this wild predator, and let her fall apart. Didn't look away, didn't judge, just witnessed. Day 3. The storm was dying. The wind had dropped from a scream to a whisper, and patches of blue were visible through the clouds. The wolf stood, unsteady but upright, and walked to the door.
We need to leave. Now. All right. Let's
He
go.
sniffed at the gap where cold air seeped in and looked back at Elena. The message was clear. Time to leave. He needed to go back to whatever life he had out there, and Elena needed him to go, because having a wild wolf in her cabin was objectively insane, no matter how many heart-to-hearts they'd had. She opened the door. The world outside was blindingly white and impossibly still. The wolf stepped out carefully, testing each paw in the deep snow. He turned back once, looked at her with those yellow eyes, and then disappeared into the tree line without a sound. Elena closed the door and sat down heavily in her chair. The cabin felt enormous suddenly, empty in a way it hadn't before. She tried to settle back into her solitude, but it felt different now. Lonelier. 2 hours later, she needed firewood. The storm had burned through most of her supply, keeping them both alive. She pulled on her parka, grabbed the axe, and headed toward the shed about 40 yards from the cabin. The sun was out now, glinting off the snow so bright it hurt her eyes even through sunglasses. She was halfway to the shed when she heard it, a sound that triggered every primal fear coded into human DNA, a growl. Deep. Rumbling. Massive. Elena turned slowly, very slowly, and her blood went cold.
No, go back. Stay away.
Between her and the cabin stood a grizzly bear. A big one, maybe 700 pounds, with matted brown fur and small, intelligent eyes fixed directly on her. Bears in February were supposed to be hibernating, but this one clearly wasn't. Maybe the storm had collapsed his den. Maybe he was sick. Maybe he was just the unluckiest bear in Alaska.
No,
but he was awake.
Stop. Stay back.
He was huge, and he was looking at Elena like she was the first meal he'd seen in months. She had an axe. He had 800 pounds of muscle and claws like kitchen knives. This wasn't even close to a fair fight. Elena backed up slowly, trying to remember everything she'd read about bear encounters. Don't run. Don't make eye contact. Make yourself big. But the bear kept coming, matching her pace, and she realized with crystal clarity that she was about to die. Right here, 40 yards from safety, and nobody would find her body until spring, if ever.
Keep back.
The bear charged, not a bluff charge,
Get away. No.
a real one. Elena raised the axe, knowing it would do absolutely nothing, and in that split second she thought about David, about how she'd be seeing him soon. And weirdly, she felt almost peaceful. And then something black and impossibly fast hit the bear from the side like a missile.
The wolf. It's the wolf. He saved
The
me.
wolf. Her wolf. The one who should have been miles away by now. He slammed into the grizzly with a snarl that sounded like tearing metal, jaws clamping onto the bear's throat, body twisting with feral intensity. The bear roared, a sound of shock and rage, and reared up, trying to shake him off. But the wolf held on, teeth buried deep, refusing to let go even as the bear's massive paws raked across his side, tearing through fur and flesh.
Can't.
Elena stood frozen, watching this impossible battle. The wolf was giving everything he had, fighting with the desperation of a creature that knew this was his last fight. The bear was bigger, stronger, but the wolf was faster, smarter, and absolutely relentless. He released the bear's throat and darted away before a massive paw could connect, then lunged back in, biting at the bear's legs, his face, anywhere he could reach. The bear was bleeding now, confused, starting to back up, and then the wolf made a mistake. He went for the throat again, and this time the bear was ready. One massive paw caught him mid-leap and sent him flying. He hit a tree with a sickening thud and dropped into the snow, not moving. The bear, bleeding and furious, turned toward him for the
Leave him
killing blow,
alone!
and Elena screamed, not words, just a raw, primal sound of rage and fear. She charged at the bear with her axe raised, screaming like a banshee, and maybe it was the surprise, maybe it was the blood loss, maybe it was just bad luck, but the bear turned and ran, crashed back into the forest, leaving a trail of red in the white snow. Elena dropped the axe and ran to the wolf. He was breathing, but barely. Blood matted his black fur, and she could see deep gashes along his side where the bear's claws had connected. No, 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 she whispered, hands hovering over him, not knowing where to touch without causing more pain. His yellow eye opened, just a sliver, and looked at her, and she saw it. The same look from 3 days ago. Trust. Except this time, it was mixed with something else. Satisfaction, maybe, like he'd done what he came back to do. Elena didn't think. She grabbed the tarp from where she'd left it by the woodpile, loaded the wolf onto it as gently as she could while he whimpered softly, and dragged him back to the cabin. It took every ounce of strength she had. Once inside, she positioned him by the fire, grabbed her first aid kit, and got to work. She'd been a veterinary technician before moving out here, and while she'd never treated a wolf before, the basics were the same. Clean the wounds, stop the bleeding, pray. She worked through the night. The wolf drifted in and out of consciousness, but he didn't fight her, didn't snap or growl when she stitched the worst of the gashes, just lay there, breathing, trusting. By morning, he was stable, weak but stable. And Elena sat back against the wall, covered in blood, exhausted beyond words, and started laughing, crying and laughing at the same time, because this wild animal had come back, had saved her life, had trusted her enough to let her save his. The wolf lived. It took weeks, but he healed, and he didn't leave. Elena told herself she'd release him once he was strong enough, but when that day came, he stayed. He'd sleep by the fire at night, go hunting during the day, and always come back. She named him Shadow because he moved like one. And for the first time since losing David, Elena felt like she could breathe again. Like maybe she wasn't meant to be alone forever. Years passed. Shadow grew older, grayer, slower. Elena grew softer, learned to smile again, started writing about her life in the wilderness. People told her she should send Shadow to a sanctuary, that keeping a wolf was dangerous. She just smiled and scratched behind his ears, and he'd lean into her hand, yellow eyes half closed in contentment. He'd saved her life. She'd saved his. Some bonds transcend species. Shadow died on a clear spring morning 7 years after she found him. He simply didn't wake up. Elena buried him on a hill overlooking the cabin, under an old spruce tree where the sun hit just right in the afternoons. She carved his name into a piece of driftwood and planted it at the head of the grave. And she cried. But they were different tears than the ones she'd cried for David. These were grateful tears, because Shadow had taught her something she'd forgotten. That love, in whatever form it takes, is always worth the pain of losing it. Elena still lives in that cabin. She's not alone anymore, not really. Sometimes, on winter nights when the wind howls through the mountains, she swears she can hear him. A distant howl, a shadow moving through the trees. Maybe it's her imagination, maybe it's just the wind, or maybe some bonds are strong enough that not even death can break them completely.